Hello, and welcome to another live chapter reading of Class Clown by Allan Evans, as presented by Itsy Bitsy Book Bits. Chapter 1, A Gathering of Clowns. The improbable and the exotic and the spectacular of the traveling circus becomes something entirely different with the departure of the young kids and daylight. Twilight moved in as the circus switched to night mode, and the last show of the day began. The bright red of the soaring big tent took on a bloody hue with the arriving shadows, while the entertainers looked glamorous in an old Hollywood way. Yes, I was at the circus. Not what I wanted to be doing, but there I was. Most of our day had been exactly what I expected. Little kids, silly clowns, elephants, and Bengal tigers, trapeze acts, jugglers, peanuts, and hot dogs. We sat through the 3 shows, my mom and I following my dad to each fresh vintage points for each one. My father committed to thoroughness in his research. This wasn't how I had expected to spend my last day before starting high school, but my father had other plans. We were having Sunday breakfast when my mother mentioned that my dad had a surprise. "What is it?" I said eagerly through a mouthful of Cinnamon Toast Crunch. I know, I sounded like a kid on Christmas, but I've always liked surprises. "We're going to the circus today," my father said with a smile. I didn't like that surprise, though. Did he think I was 10 years old? "Have fun," I replied. "Let me know how many clowns they fit into that little car." "You don't want to come with us?" my father asked, a wounded expression coloring his face. Guilt began its familiar trip to join the always present anxiety and sarcasm in my frontal lobe. "I thought it would be fun to go as a family," he said. "With school starting, we won't have many opportunities to hang out together, especially if you get on the soccer team. And it would look more natural if all 3 of us went." "Wait, what? Natural?" "So, Dad, there wouldn't be more to the story here, would there?" Clearly, he wasn't being forthright with me, so I fixed my unyielding gaze on him. Believe me, I could be quite a force of nature when I put my mind to it. As my father looked back at me with his seemingly infinite patience, I understood where my stubbornness came from. "Constantine," my mother, ever the peacemaker, murmured behind her journal. My father sighed. "It's for an article I'm writing. Clowns International is the I knew there was more to the story. Clowns International is the oldest clown society in the world, dating back to the mid-1940s. They've managed to keep the clowning tradition alive while hiding some of their unsavory aspects. I'm writing a feature on their origins, as well as the bizarre history of clowns." My father was a magazine writer who wrote investigative pieces on the mysteries of our times. He's written articles on UFOs and the Roswell crash, Bigfoot, Stonehenge, the Bermuda Triangle, and my father's favorite, the Mackenzie poltergeist. A number of people exploring the Black Mausoleum, where Sir George Mackenzie lies, on the City of the Dead tour in Edinburgh had experienced bruises, scratches, and fainting spells. My father returned with a great story, as well as scratches across the back of his neck. Though I didn't make that trip. I've been on many of his trips as my father's unofficial research assistant. I was no stranger to helping with his stories in some capacity. "So we have to be your cover while you explore the circus," I groaned. "But clowns? Really?" "Are you afraid of clowns?" my father asked. "It's okay. Many people are." Was he serious? After all, I was the girl in those scary movies who insists on being the first to enter the haunted house. I was the girl who regularly faced down paranormal intruders. I was the ghost girl, after all, even signing yearbooks as Abnormal Abbey. I tried to read his expression as my mother studied me over her journal while she waited for my response. "Hardly," I replied. "I've never cared for clowns, but I'm definitely not afraid of them. When you've seen what I've seen..." I let my words hang there as both parents nodded in understanding. They knew some, but by no means all, of the paranormal freak show I've had to face. But if I was being honest with myself, deep down, there was something about clowns that brought out anxiety. "So you'll join us?" My father's face was almost childlike in his eagerness. How could I refuse him? "I'm in. I answered, not realizing the chain of events that those words would instigate. So, there I was, at the circus, my rear end tired of the wooden benches after sitting through 3 shows. The 4th show of the day was ready to begin, and here I go again. By Whitesnake popped into my head. The 80s was the soundtrack of my life, but not in a good way this time. While the kid in me had enjoyed the comedy of the clowns and the daring high-wire acrobatics, the teenager in me had grown bored with seeing it multiple times. I excused myself, telling my parents I needed to find a bathroom before the show began. Outside the big tent, jugglers and a hobo clown entertained the late-arriving stragglers. The hobo clown gracefully slid in between a middle-aged couple and grabbed hold of the unsuspecting wife's hand. She hadn't yet realized her husband had given up his trailing position to the clown. She was still oblivious as they disappeared out of sight into the tent. I would have paid money to see her reaction when she finally turned around. The sprawling circus held a big tent surrounded by a sea of smaller ones, housing the animals and various performers. It was organized to herd the crowd into predetermined areas, keeping them with the performers and merchants and away from the backstage area. All the restricted areas were clearly marked with yellow corded rope, making it easy for me to find the way into trouble. I wasn't concerned about possible consequences. It was just a circus after all. So I ducked under the rope and stepped into another world, leaving behind the familiar circus noise and smells. The backstage area was a series of corridors between the tents and trailers, an obstacle course of ropes and cords, twists and turns. The noise level dropped off considerably as I followed the well-worn path. Behind the big tent, I passed the performer entrance, where women in sequin costumes, looking glamorous in years gone by sort of way, crowded next to 4 men in tights. Obviously brothers, these men were rippling with muscle as they gyrated through some last-minute stretches. A petite but muscled Asian woman was doing the splits in the center of the group. Behind them, an older clown towered over the group. He faced in my direction and caught me staring. It was a long moment as he held my gaze, while I held my breath. He continued to watch me as I stepped closer to the edge of the tent, not wanting to be discovered. Boisterous voices grew louder as another group of men moved into view. Judging by their clothing, rough hands, and rougher language, these men were roustabouts, circus laborers, in other words. I knew these men would not appreciate my transgression into their inner sanctum, and I'd rather not find out the hard way what they do with trespassers. Looking for a way out, I glanced back at the August clown, his grandfatherly features evident under his makeup. He gave me a wink and nodded to the left. Just ahead, I saw where he wanted me to go. There was a break between tents, a corridor branching away from the crowd. I gave the older clown a thumbs up and darted to safety, relieved to be putting distance between me and the laborers. Picking up speed, I took a right, then a left, then another right, feeling like a hamster running through a maze of tunnels. When I reached the end of the corridor, I stood in awe at the marvel in front of me. Brightly painted trailers and tents, looking to be the residences of the circus people, filled the large open space. The trailers were mobile billboards advertising the performers: the Flying Quartz Brothers, Marco the Magnificent, Mystic Harmony French, Christina the Contortionist, Weary Willie the Hobo Clown, and Mademoiselle Octavie Latour. Her trailer was subtly billed as a sensation of all sensations, fitting for the circus's main attraction. A few people moved about the trailers, but no one seemed to care it was there. Finding myself drawn to the elegant red-headed woman sitting outside the Harmony French trailer, I moved in her direction. A small white dog repeatedly jumped as it tried to reach an offered treat, held tantalizing out of reach. The woman laughed and cajoled the dog to continue its efforts. With the sun setting, the nearby bonfire cast a warm light over the woman's features. Looking to be in her late 20s, her hair was a rich shade of copper, flowing in waves to embellish her glowing cream-colored skin. Her eyes were emerald green and brightened the world around her. With a straight nose and full lips, she looked a picture of grace and perfection. She glanced up at me and smiled. "Join us," she said, as she relinquished the treat to her happy dog. Taking a seat next to her, I felt self-conscious, being in the exotic woman's presence. She studied me for a long moment, her appraising eyes taking in my bright pink Pine Ridge High School top, jean shorts, and flip-flops. Her eyes lingered on my face as a wrinkle appeared between her eyebrows. "There's something unusual about you, isn't there?" She said this observationally, not in a judgy sort of way. I don't like being around judgy people. Judgy people need to go away. Far away. I shrugged in reply, unwilling to give away any of my secrets. Sharing them hasn't always worked out well for me in the past. The red-headed woman leaned forward in her chair, her penetrating eyes looking into me. "My name is Harmony French," she said in a voice that was slightly louder than a whisper, that yet carried an air of importance. I found myself leaning in closer. "Gifted with the ability to see past the outside, I am a mystic," she continued. "Whether through intuition, instinct, or insight, I can often see what others cannot." She reached out for my hand and held it with both of hers. She had a hint of a smile, a sort of smile that seemed to speak volumes about the wisdom gained from a life of seeing into others. We have much in common, it appears. How could I possibly have anything in common with a woman like her? My head spinning, I had zero idea what to say. "What's your name, dear girl?" "Abbey." "The joy of the Father," Harmony smiled again, recognizing my confusion. "Your name, Abbey, means the joy of the Father. You must make your father quite happy." I shrugged. "Yeah, but I think I scare him too." "He's stronger than you think," Harmony insisted. "Trust him. He can be just what you need." I found myself nodding. I'll try to include him more often instead of keeping everything in my life to myself, but it hasn't always been easy for me to make new friends. We all have a desire to connect with others. It works best if you open up and be vulnerable, and then you allow people in. About that, I don't really let anyone in. I'm kind of a private person. Unable to stop my smile, I paused, finding myself willing to open up to her. Well, there might be one exception. Harmony's eyes danced as she smiled. "There is a boy, I see." "There's always a boy," I said, looking at my nails, attempting to sound flippant. Harmony wagged her finger at me. "But this one is special. He gets you and accepts you for all that you are, and yet still adores you for each fresh thing that you utter." "Teenage love," she murmured. Teenage love, I thought. Going to the mall, wandering around hand in hand with a silence that's comfortable, walking around at night for no reason at all, his chest, her head, looking at the stars, uncertain of how long it will last, a risk you're both willing to take, even if it means having a broken heart. It's not yet true love, not lust, nor infatuation. It's teenage love, here to stay, here to play with our hearts, and never go away. Maybe a song I heard, possibly something a friend shared, but it fit. "What's his name?" she asked. "Turner," I replied, a warm feeling spreading across my cheeks. We met over the summer. Turner was at camp with me, and I'd been instantly attracted to his smile and bad boy looks. Harmony nodded in that knowing sort of way. "Yet I sense you have an unusually strong bond." "It must have been quite the summer." That was putting it mildly. Turner and I had almost died together, trapped in a burning building at camp. We relied on each other, finding shared strength as we overcame every obstacle placed in our path to safety. It was because of each other that we survived it all. We shared a near-death experience. That sort of thing brings people together. He was also my first kiss. "I see you like to downplay things." She held my gaze, her warm eyes lighting up her face. "But we both know there was more to the story than you're willing to let on." After a long moment, she looked away at something unseen in the distance. Harmony squeezed my hand as her smile faded. "There are more challenges ahead, larger ones. Events are escalating, and many will be drawn into the coming chaos. It won't be you alone facing the darkness. But remember, a swirling storm must have something at its center." She paused, waiting for me. "Okay, I'll play." "And," I offered with a wave, "you, my young lady, will be at the storm's center. Much is riding on your shoulders. Be strong, be courageous, and be decisive." She held my gaze for a moment, not saying another word. She didn't have to, as her eyes conveyed the magnitude of her message. Harmony abruptly stood and headed for her trailer, her dog trailing a few feet behind her. I found myself rooted to the spot as I thought about her warning. Life sure gets complicated. A boy stood there looking at me, wearing jeans, cowboy boots, and a white t-shirt. At least, it had been white a very long time ago, with the words, "Life is a circus," stenciled on the front. Tattoos colored his arms, working well with his tan and the grime. He wore his brown hair long and hanging into his brown eyes, and he was smiling at me. "Hi," I replied, feeling self-conscious as he eyed me, a smirk replacing the smile. "It's easy to get lost around here. I can see why you may have taken a wrong turn. Let's get you back." With that, he walked away before pausing and turning. "Aren't you coming?" he asked, waving me forward, mock impatience in his body language. "I have other jobs to do around here. I can't hang around with you all night." I hurried to catch up. He walked like he had some place to go, making me work to keep up with him. We moved into the maze, taking seemingly random turns. After a few moments, he slowed down, allowing me to walk alongside him. "Hey," I asked, "what's your name?" "Jake." "Okay, Jake. What's it like working in a circus?" "I bet it's fun." He slowed down a bit more and shook his head. "On stage, the performers get all the attention, but backstage, you live packed into small space with a lot of people and a lot of smells to go along with the hard work. So the stars get knocked out of your eyes in a hurry. It's no great lifestyle. It's like living the life of a rat that's constantly moving from one place to another. You'll be underpaid and you'll lose all contact with time and reality." "So you're in it for the glamour?" His laugh, a loud barking sound, caught me off guard. It took a moment for him to compose himself as we made another turn. "Hardly. I grew up here. My father is the operations manager of the circus. That's all I know." We walked in silence for a moment before Jake spoke again. "You know, I've never seen Miss French talk with anyone like she did with you. Other than her husband, she only talks during her performances. To say she's a private person isn't saying it strongly enough. I've spoken with her once in all the time she's been here, and that was after 2 years. Consider yourself lucky." Unsure what to do with the information, I simply nodded. We turned another corner, to the right this time, and unexpectedly, my travel guide held out an arm, stopping me in my tracks. He put a firm hand on my bicep, pulling me back into the shadows. A group was gathered outside a tent, silhouetted by the overhead lights. I couldn't see who made up the group, but there were over a dozen of them. Loud voices suggested an argument was taking place. Jake's grip tightened on my arm, and he pulled me closer. I could smell his sweat, but it wasn't altogether an unpleasant scent either. Catching my eye, Jake held a finger to his lips, making it clear he wanted my silence. No problem, as I was straining to hear what was going on, catching only bits and pieces. "He creeps me out, and that's saying something. How can we trust him? What if he does? What if he hurts someone? What then? He's not one of us. Relic never was. Have you seen the way he watches her? It's not right. We need to say something. We need to come forward." Something about those words set the crowd off, and tempers overflowed. Several of the men converged on one of the smaller men, pushing him. A man jabbed a finger into the smaller man's chest. "That's not what we do. We stick together," the man spat. The argument looked likely to become a brawl at any moment. Just when it appeared the first punch was going to be thrown, everything changed. The strident voices hushed, and the men separated, yet the tension was more palpable than ever. The flap to the tent pushed open, and a man emerged. He paused, looking around the group without comment. The light from the tent illuminated the scene before us, and I gasped. The man, made up in full clown makeup, was exactly what scared people about clowns. Wearing dark shades of crimson and black, his eyes were sunk in pools of fury. The expression on his face, meant to be a painted smile, was a grimace of hate. His body was coiled, seemingly ready to lash out at anyone that got in his way. The other men parted and moved away, looking to put space between them and the dark performer. As the men stepped into the light, I recognized them for who they were. Despite the variety of appearances, they all had one thing in common. They were clowns. The most terrified group of clowns I'd ever witnessed. The crimson clown left the entrance after a moment and stomped in our direction. Jake's hand squeezed my arm so hard I let out a small cry of pain. The clown stopped in mid-stride and looked right at me, an arm's length away. Nothing was said as he studied me, my goosebumps rising and his eyes bored into me. At that moment, I feared for my safety. Jake must have felt it, too, because he pushed me away from the tent's shadow. "Go," he hissed. "Get out of here." There was definitely an edge of fear in his voice. Moving away from Jake and the clown, I was anxious to be anywhere else. I took the first turn and broke into a run, not stopping until I found the yellow rope and the safety of the crowd. That's all for today. I hope you enjoyed the reading. Good night.